The Oregon Education Investment Board will come to order. Seth, will you call the roll?
Yeah. Roman Kitzhaber?
Here.
Julia Brim Edwards?
Here.
Yvonne Curtis?
Here.
Matthew Donegan? Here. Samuel Henry?
Je suis.
Nicole June Maher?
Here.
Mark Mulvihill?
Here.
David Reeves?
Here.
Ron Saxton?
Here.
Mary Spildy?
Here.
Kate Duran?
Here.
Hannah Bendry?
Here.
Dick Withnell? Here.
Great. All members are present and accounted for. I think the first order of business would be to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
So moved.
Been moved and
Seconded.
seconded. Is there discussion? Without objection, so ordered. I'd like to start the meeting by letting you know, and perhaps some of you do know, that our friend and colleague Mary Spildy has submitted her resignation to the board, effective immediately, and want to make sure that you understand it's not personal. Mary has been part of this really from even before we had the investment board, has been an incredible contributor. It has been a joy to discuss issues and debate issues with her. She just needs to turn more of her attention back to LCC right now, and I certainly respect that. You know, you've been a real inspiration to me, Mary, and I think to students and people all over the state. And as I've told you before, you are famously Scottish, but you are an Oregon treasure. And I'm just deeply grateful that you've given us your time and talent for so long. And I'd like to just see if there's anybody else who might like to express a few words here.
I'll go first. So, Mary and I have a long history just from working in the same community, and I can see why, after her long service on this board, she needed to stay more in the community, because in the community we always called on you to be in everything. And two of the key things, the Regional Achievement Collaborative in Lane County was started by Mary, and what we also call RTech, which is Career Technical Education. So I appreciate you as a community leader, but in terms of this board, if you remember, Mary and Duncan wrote your transition plan for you when you were first elected, and then Ron and I at the higher ed, and Ron and I worked at K-12. So I said, when you're leaving this board, it's sort of like a part of me leaving, because you've just been so instrumental for the work. And I just really want to thank you, not only for your contribution here, for your advocacy, and for being just such a great leader.
I'd like to certainly second that, and I think most people throughout Oregon, in fact, the Northwest, have recognized the kind of leadership that Mary has brought, and particularly as an advocate of our wonderful community college system, and just as a wonderful, I mean, I shouldn't say this because I'm older than she is, but a role model for all of us in terms of leadership and focus and direction. And if you've ever seen Mary work in a committee, then you have a good idea of what good leadership can do. So Mary, we're going to appreciate you, miss you, but as I told her outside in the hallway, she's not that far away. And so we will continue to appreciate the work you've done.
Hey, Ron?
Well, I'll just add, as Nancy did at the beginning of this, when you first came in and asked Nancy and Duncan and Mary and I to kind of lead putting together the education part. I think that was, an exciting opportunity to see a new direction for the state, and it's now great 4 years later to see some of that progressing, a lot of it progressing. I actually think it would be great to go back and dust off the memos the four of us sent you, because there are some really good ideas in there that we still need to be pursuing. But it's been wonderful working with you, Mary, and hope to see you a lot.
Yeah, I think we're going to really miss Mary on this board. She's been a great voice for community colleges, and we're happy to be in there. And I think just overall for education in the state. So, hope you continue your advocacy on a statewide level.
And I'd just like to thank Mary for continuing to advocate for student access, so that more and more of our students who haven't had access continue to have those doors open. So thank you, and I know you keep working on that.
So, your turn, Mary.
Well, thank you, Governor, and members of Holy Idea for the very, very kind remarks. Between finals week and Christmas, I spent a week in Scotland with my 98-year-old mother. And there's nothing like looking at the world through the eyes of a 98-year-old to start to think about what's important. And and what your passions are. And what I realized was that, as has always been the case, my passions are community college students, some of the most underrepresented students in this country, and I just feel a draw to be more directly involved with the work on my own campus. We're in the midst of some transformational change, and I want to be working shoulder to shoulder with our faculty to make these changes, and that's going to take a little more presence. And so I'm not abandoning the work or the agenda. This is very, very important work for our students and for our state. I'll just be working on a local level, and will, I'm sure, show up at meetings on occasion, but it will be nice not to have to be here. I told my assistant, she said, "Oh, look, all this time that's going to open up." And I said, "Do not fill it," because I would do that myself. So I love my time on the investment board and before the investment board. I want to thank you, Governor Chris Hubbard, for your faith in me and giving me the opportunity to do this work. It's great work for a wee lassie from Scotland to be able to do. And thank you, and I wish you all the best going forward. And as Sam says, I won't be very far away. I do need to say that I'm on the agenda someplace else at 1:45, so I won't be staying for much of your meeting. But thank you so much for all your support on my time on the board.
A little something for you from the board.
Oh, thank you very much.
You can take it to your next meeting. So the next little item of business is Mary was the alternative chair for us, and I'm going to hand that gavel to Nicole here. I think she's a great choice. She is a fierce advocate for our agenda. She's very passionate about ensuring that all of our children succeed in the state, and I think has challenged all of us, certainly including myself, to get out of our traditional silos and find different ways that we can bring the state together around equity and opportunity for students of all ages. So let's welcome Nicole to her new position. Anything you'd like to say?
Well, I would just first like to appreciate and thank Mary for her service and recognize that I will have big and important shoes to fill.
Can you put your mouth in there?
Yes.
Can you hear you?
Thank you, Dr. Goffo. So I think this is a tremendous opportunity, and I am really excited about where the Oregon Education Investment Board is, and I think we're really hitting our stride and our ability to really focus on outcomes for the young people in our early learning system, the children in our K-12, and our college students. And so I'm just excited to serve. And for those of you who don't know me that well, I'm a member of the Tlingit tribe, and we are famous for being both matrilineal and matriarchal, which means that women own everything and we make all the decisions, and we love to facilitate a meeting. So I'm thrilled to be here and bring a little part of my culture with me.
Thank you very much. Okay, very good. We'll look forward to that. That'll be interesting. Fortunately, most of it will happen when I'm not here. That's the beauty of it, right? So the first action item we have is on the recommendations on our achievement compacts, which have been not a linear process to arrive. And I would like to take just a couple minutes and make a few summary remarks, and then I'll turn it over to Nancy to go into more detail. So as you recall, when we adopted the concept of achievement compacts, it was really sort of a handshake between the state and our educational institutions. And the state side of the handshake was to provide resources either directly to the institution or through targeted investments, and then with those resources, the institutions would essentially seek to achieve the outcomes and metrics within the achievement compacts. So let me give you a little background, particularly on where these recommendations come from, and I'm pretty sure they've been fairly well vetted. The idea is to continue to sort of on an ongoing basis add additional value to the achievement compacts, which really are a tool that seek to align the work of all of our educational institutions around a common objective, being 40-40-20, to sort of break down the silos and bring that kind of alignment to our effort. And there are 5 recommendations. The first one is, as you recall, and this was, I think, probably the least linear process, was to look at the number of metrics that we had. And those of you who remember the Oregon Progress Board will remember that it tried to measure just about everything with not a great deal of success because of that. And so the question was, are some of these metrics less important than others? And there was a pretty extensive process, I think, that started in the fall of 2013 to look at those metrics. It was not nearly as inclusive a process as the one that led to the original set of metrics. And when we went back and essentially brought those people back in, there were pretty good reasons for most of the metrics that were in there. And so this recommendation is to not reduce the size of the metrics, the number of the metrics, certainly at least at this time, but to change the sort of the goal-setting exercise from 1 year, which is really sort of predictive, to a 3-year goal-setting exercise, which allows for more long-term strategic planning. The second recommendation seeks to align the Achievement Compact process with all the other processes that are already going on in the K through 12 system, so that we are not adding additional process, but actually trying to reduce and align the work and actually reduce duplication and make the processes more integrated. The third is to try to more directly and on the front end engage affected communities that are interested in using the strategic investments to address a particular metric. Instead of coming up with a set of strategic investments on the front end and then asking for their buy-in, actually engage them on the front end in discussing the best way to develop those strategic investments going forward. The fourth one is one that I'm particularly interested in, and that's actually having the staff of the OAB actually analyze the data that's coming in instead of just receiving it, actually analyze the data, and so the data will actually be arrayed in a way that can drive decisions. So again, this is a sort of a coordination process. So in some cases, you've got districts that have set a low bar. So one of the questions is why? There are districts that set a high bar, and the question is what makes you think you can achieve it? And also, and particularly, looking at the Achievement Compact Advisory Committee process to make sure, again, that data is useful and arrives on a timely basis that can actually drive decisions within the institution. And then the fifth recommendation is basically asking the HEC to sort of look at the Achievement Compacts for post-secondary education because there's been a governance change, and want to make sure that they still make sense in the context of the new governance structure. So with that.
Thank you. I'll just add a few things and then have you turn to one piece of the packet. So the idea to make sure we keep all the existing measures, I think another compelling reason to do that is that the earlier, if you remember when they were developed, these were key leverage points to help a student move seamlessly along a pathway really from birth through college and career. And some of the earlier metrics or outcomes really leverage the next metrics or outcomes. So we know if students aren't ready for kindergarten, hitting that third grade reading proficiency is going to be really, really difficult. We know if students are chronically absent in sixth grade, being college and career ready is going to be really difficult. And we know that one of the biggest barriers to getting college and to staying in college is math and the math sequence. So if we're not thinking about math in fifth grade, in eighth grade, it's really not going to help kids move smoothly along the pathway to get their 3 college credits in high school and go on to post-secondary. So that's just a little bit added to why and I want to thank all of you because it was through input from all of you along these various conversations that have really influenced all of these decisions with some other partners that we went out and met with. I'd say the only other thing, in addition to what the governor said, if you look, so under tab 1, if you were to go to the Achievement Compact package, and if you would go to page 3, and this came out of the Outcomes and Investments last meeting to really meet with institutions that set high and low goals, and just to really ask them, you know, why did you set your goal that way, and what would you need to be able, if it's low, to set it higher? What keeps you from setting a higher goal? And if you set a high goal, what is the process with your Achievement Compact Advisory Committee that makes you do that and feel confident you can get there? The last part of that recommendation is to acknowledge that to work effectively as an Achievement Compact Advisory Committee might take professional development for some of the committees, because it's a new idea, and there are committees that are working really effectively, and there's other committees who are still learning how to work effectively. So let's bring a group of diverse people together and ask what's real, find out the successes, and then let's do professional development or whatever support. It could be just-in-time support, but let's help the ones who are still trying to figure out how to make that a rich process of bringing different stakeholders to the table and really setting those matrix and coming up with the local plans that they want to come up with. So in addition to that, if you look at page 4, what we've done is we've really outlined on a calendar what are the steps we're going to do to ensure we really implement the recommendation. And so there's a sense-making cycle of how this goes along. So you'll just see there's a date where the compacts come in, we begin to analyze them, we go out to the field before we're going to start our strategic investments, like the governor said, to really find out, if we show them the matrix and we show them how we're doing, what is it, give us your best thinking and your advice about what we should be thinking about next before we come up with our own ideas. So this timeline is also to hold me accountable, to hold the OEIB accountable, so that we really do make sure all the things that would be value added do happen, and it's predictable to people in the field. They know that it's going to happen. So with that, maybe you want to discuss.
So I'm going to frame sort of how we're going to have the discussion, and then I'll add a little bit of commentary. And I'm actually going to start with you, Matt. So I think what would be most helpful is if we could actually just go through OEIB board members and share your response, any questions you might have, and your general level of support. If you have had all your questions answered and you're very supportive, feel free to just say that and pass in the interest of time. So in order to give you a moment to collect your thoughts, I will be happy to go first. I am very supportive of these recommendations, and I am very pleased that some of the areas that we have heard from communities that they're very passionate about will still be included. I certainly was conscientious of the number that have always been part of the achievement cap, but I think that with the ability to achieve them over 3 years, it's much more realistic. And the fact that we've had folks from across the state repeatedly remind us about how important things like attendance are, things like disaggregating the data, and the fact that we'll be able to continue to have those held within this, but really be able to have a longer time frame and allocate resources is very positive. So I'm very supportive.
Can I just, one thing I forgot, it's in recommendation number 1, is because there are a number along the pathway, but we've put structures in place like the regional achievement collaboratives, the hubs, some of these communities, collective impact to really help us. So if we think of this as it's what the community needs to do together, I think it helps us know that we can achieve this.
Great. And so what we can do is just sort of go through the full board, and then at the end really give some time for some of our key staff to respond to the questions. So Matt, if you want to start us out.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the great work here, Nancy and your staff. I just want to, there's a couple of questions. I'll first maybe play back my understanding of the process. So when it comes to quality control, call it, it seems that what we're doing is this is a bottom-up approach where the districts or the entities are presenting their drafts. And then on K-12, we're going to ask OEIB staff to basically conduct a bit of a best practices exercise, look at who's doing what, look at the high, the more ambitious, the less ambitious. and presumably with some eye towards best practices and improving all of them together. It seems as if what I'm seeing on, so that's recommendation, I think, 3. Yeah, and then on 4, there's an analogous process for higher education, but we're actually outsourcing that to the HEC as opposed to having our own staff perform that function. Is that a fair,
Is it okay to
is
answer?
that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think the main thing that HEC's doing initially is taking a look at the original achievement compacts as they were developed at the time the OUS was shifting to the HEC. And I think, and Ben can speak to this, but we do have a statute that says they need to relook it to make sure, given the new structure, they're right now. Once that is completed, then we would want to do the same thing, go out to the institutions, look at them. Ben, we haven't decided who would do that, whether it would be the OEIB or the HEC, but do you have any?
Just to underscore what you said, Nancy, I think the recommendation 5 is focused on the first phase. Are the measures the right measures? Is the submission timeline the right submission timeline? Does the HEC have any recommendations to make to the OEIB about changing the process? I think we'll need then to have a subsequent conversation like the one that is reflected in recommendations 3 and 4 about how they're actually used to make progress in higher education.
So that's helpful. It is, I mean, as you look ahead, then, Nancy, do you envision the OEIB then eventually assuming that function, or will we continue to outsource that to the HEC?
So the recommendations and what it says in there, HEC is going to tell us a time they're going to bring it back. And I think at that point, once we hear the recommendation, then the OEIB board would decide whether that's something we believe is most appropriate for OEIB staff to do the analysis and going out, or whether it would seem best for HEC to do that. So that'd be a decision we'd make together.
Okay. The second question is, and again, what I understand is that this is kind of more of a bottom-up approach. It seems practical. When, if any, do you see us, at any time, do you see us doing a bit of a strategic statewide overlay and then kind of a plate back to the individual entities? And once you do the bottom-up, you add it all up, you see where are we relative to our state goals. Is there going to be a practical feedback mechanism to then adjust the achievement compacts to make sure we're meeting our targets?
Yeah, I think we see it as two-pronged. The first is that we look at the data in outcomes investment, just started looking at that, and it will tell us we need to go to certain institutions to find out more what's going on. But the other thing is to use this data from a systems point of view for us. You know, to start thinking about, are there policies we need to think about, legislation? What makes us start thinking about strategic investments that, you know, as we go along? So it's meant to do both. It's also meant to be, let's look at the whole system.
I guess one last question before I finally turn it over. Are we seeing any early results as to how these achievement compacts are clarifying expectations and actually moving the needle on behalf of our kids?
Peter, do you want to, since you did the data analysis, you want to come up and?
Can I come up?
Yeah, you can talk to the return one.
The question is whether we're seeing any initial results as a result of the Achievement Compact?
Making
Is
a
that-
In other words, my understanding of the achievement compacts is that it just stands to reason the state's investing a lot of money, and we want to make sure that we have clarity of expectations around that. But presumably, hopefully that clarity of expectations will actually improve performance out of the school. I mean, that's actually what we're all about, right? So we've been at this a little while to understand still in the kind of startup phase, but are there any results shown?
Well, I think what it can speak to is individual interviews with Achievement Compact committees across the state have shown evidence that in some districts, community colleges, and universities, this process is getting traction and making a difference. And I think a key question is what are the components of those processes that we'd want to replicate? But I think it's unfortunately not necessarily the rule that it's making a difference in every institution.
I think in addition to that, what happens at the K-12 system is what's on these achievement compacts is on the state report card. So you can then when the analysis of the state report card is done by the Oregon Department of Education, you can see which school districts and which schools are really making a difference. And it will be very interesting to look at that as compared to who's setting high goals, how are they doing. So we do have, that's how we work when we think of us being a P20 and ODE being part of us. That's where we can really look at that data.
First of all, Nancy, I want to thank you for the process, because this issue was one where we really stormed and normed. I think we had a really healthy conversation, but we had a lot of different views on this and process. And the fact that you have done your homework, worked with your staff, and brought forth a recommendation to the board, I appreciate that. You'll have my support and vote on this. A couple comments. I've said earlier that I was concerned about the number of indicators. I still am. I do believe that there are too many indicators for a district to effectively manage. However, I also understand why they're remaining. They're very important to the 40-40-20 effort. You know, I look at like attendance. I think attendance I'm seeing is gaining traction like third grade reading is, because it's an indicator that people outside of education can embrace. You know, I'm looking at, you know, work with Hub, we're going to talk about a little bit, looking at the other work. People, comments to me have been, it's not only my job, I don't know how to get a third grader to read, but I can sure get them to school. So I think having that indicator on there, I see the value of it, and I've kind of moved forward in support to keeping these based on the following things that you've done. Number one, to support the process to help set goals meaningfully. Looking at developing a trajectory, so that districts have a trajectory that they can see where are they as of 2015 toward 40-40-20 and 2025. And then the final thing, I felt like our budget that we assisted with the governor to submit with $800 million of strategic investments are actually tied to these indicators. So I think we've made a lot of headway in the process. I think we've made a lot of headway in the collective impact component. My original concerns that I felt there were too many indicators placed on the backs of the school districts. There's still a bit of that in me, but I also see us moving, and this is transitioning, and I'm seeing more the entire communities embracing these indicators, so we need to move forward.
Yes, I certainly support the recommendations. I like the idea of the 3-year goals instead of just rolling over 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. So that you can have an opportunity to look out 36 months and then make adjustments on the way to the overall goals. Just another comment, of course, the Outcomes Investment Committee will be looking at the overall goal of the 40-40-20 and how it relates to that. Kind of totally right in there.
I would look back over the work that David did a little bit, David Edwards, when he started the process of evaluating, and the work that Peter's done. And I think Peter's comments that he just made about the compacts and where we're at are spot on. The conversations have been the most useful part of the compacts. The actual compacts themselves and how it's moved the dial has not really taken hold. And I think part of that is because the second hand in the handshake that we promised hasn't necessarily been there, and I think that's a component that, as I make my comments, I think we'll hopefully find some ways to do that. In the first recommendation, when we talk about the 3-year, I absolutely think you have to set something out there. What it doesn't say in A is when that committee comes back together year to year, it's not just about them, to me, affirming the 3-year goals. It's about monitoring and adjusting. It's making sure that you're on point to where you want to go. And I think that's really important for us to understand for that second part of the handshake is they've set a trajectory. They have hopefully created the strategies and tactics to get them where they believe they need to go and want to go for their students. But what supports do they need is something that we can, again, reach out and assist them. So I think I would make a slight change there to, it's not just affirm the goals, it is to monitor and just make sure that we're on track. And if we need to change, then let's change. But the focus and the goal is still the same, and I appreciate that.
On the reasons, I just want to point out again, the regional achievement collaboratives, those are really important components, but they have not truly engaged people who are working with students every day as much as I believe they should. I think there's a great group of individuals, but it's a higher level that sometimes don't understand some of the realities that are happening in the schools or in the early learning hubs, wherever that is. And I think to have more practitioners there would be helpful in this. On the recommendation number 3, when we get to collecting the input from our communities and educators, and as a member of the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee, I appreciate this, and I think we have to talk about process and how that's done. In the past, when we collected input on the outcomes and investment, it was, what do you think about these recommendations that we've made? And I don't believe that's the next step. I think it is really to reach out to them and ask them what they want, what they need, and then be responsive to that. So I think there's a piece of building that process that should start now so that we can agree on what that looks like and how do we get out to all the groups so that we can take that information and then actually use it when we're meeting as the Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee to have more than just the department recommendations would be helpful. Recommendation 4 that we have, so we're going to identify, and I appreciated the comment, Nancy, around those who have set high goals and low goals. And I think it is about digging why did they set those goals is an important piece of learning for us, again, in that second part of the handshake. We need to understand better what's going on in the P through 20 system and on this board and really be able to understand the differentiated investment that we need to make, whether it's in Kearney County or whether it's in Multnomah County. Where is that and why is it? We know our children come to school far too often without having breakfast. The poverty level is high and the needs are great. And in school, you can't learn if you don't feel safe and if you haven't been fed. And I think that's another piece of how, when we look at those goals, to not just say, you've set too low goals, but to say, we want to understand better why you have these goals. And it's not okay to not have high expectations for every student, but it's also not okay not to invest in those students so they can be successful. And I think that's part of our responsibility. The piece of recommendation 5 for the Higher Education Commission, I will say one of the things that I've heard loud and clear from higher ed, and especially in the faculty for the community colleges, is there wasn't any faculty and staff involvement. It was the process in K-12, we put in there clearly that the practitioners would be involved in creating those compacts, but we didn't do that for higher ed, and I would ask that we make it very clear as a board that there needs to be faculty and staff participation in creating those compacts so that there is buy-in and a reality based on what's going on. So those are my comments and hopes and dreams that we can really do something big with the compacts.
Yeah, I support the recommendations. I think the lengthening them to 3-year spans makes a lot more sense than year to year. I was also one who wanted to see them streamlined, for the reasons they tend to be duplicative of other things out there. And I think kind of lost their focus, but I think in the recommendations, recommendation number 3, calling for a process for that makes a lot of sense. And I hope that's what comes out of there, that adjustments that make sense to the districts and to the state and to parents. The recommendation 4 for system supports, I also think is very important. It's a little bit vague, and I think we should be concentrating on that more. I think part of the reasons they haven't been success, the original compacts were not successful, is they weren't seen really as they were seen just as a mandate, I would say, as something without state support for districts that felt they couldn't meet those goals for whatever reasons or those expectations. So I think, as you've said yourself, Nancy, they should be a two-way handshake. I hope that's the way we move forward with these and they get interpreted, and I think they could be really a useful tool for us and the districts if they're really seen as something collaborative between the state and the district. So that's my hope will come out of these recommendations.
So I'm going to support the recommendations as well, and I want to thank everybody on the board for the deeper discussion we had since the topic was first raised, when we were going to extend the goal timeframe and reduce the number of metrics. I think this is a much more comprehensive approach and brings more people to the table, which is what we need if we're going to make progress. I, too, as other people have said, support the shift to multi-year goals. I think that will get a focus off of shorter timeframes. I'm going to say I think we absolutely need to keep the urgency, but have a longer horizon because it's incredibly complex work and a lot of people need to be part of it. And I think that just having a longer term goal allows for that. I want to say I appreciate that we're keeping all the milestones, especially the 3 college level course metric. I think that's going to help us keep focused on not only graduating students, but graduating students who are really ready for that next step. And I think we've already, because of that discussion, if you look at the recommendations that have been carried forward into the budget process around the Accelerated Learning Committee and things that will hopefully get kids on track in school districts with the offering more college level classes, that will really yield results in the long term. As it already has been shown how that metric can inform some of the budget processes and how to better support districts. I would also say that I'm interested in this process about looking at the spectrum of the low and the high of goal setters, specifically with those districts that set lower goals, and not at all from a perspective of punitive or for accountability purposes, but really finding out what sorts of supports and tools do the districts and schools need in order to be able to get their districts on a trajectory to for students to be ready to graduate in the college and career. Just say I also support the sort of fine-tuning that Hannah had around the monitor and adjust language. I thought that's good. It's not just something that you're going to check back in once a year. And then, so generally, I think this is a much more comprehensive approach, and I appreciate all the work that went into it. The question I would have is on the timeline. This is primarily a K-12 timeline, is my assumption, is that we might want to label it, or if it's actually going to be a K-12 and a higher ed, that there'll be some bifurcated format so that we can see that. But this, if I looked at this, I might think this is the same time frame that everybody's turning their achievement compacts in. I love the time frame because I think it, whether you're in a school or you're a parent or you're an educator, it gives you a sense of what's the purpose of the achievement compacts, what the timeline will be, and more clearly lays out the process for the development and the implementation. And then my last question would be, I can't tell from recommendation number 5 what the timeline will be. So I would think that we wouldn't want to get too much further down the track. So again, not so that we don't have such a undue focus on K-12 that we need to, if we're creating this integrated and aligned system, where's the sort of second, the next level.
Nancy?
Yeah, just a few things. So this timeline is for K-12, and if you look at the higher ed, it says B, that they should develop a timeline. So I do need to label it K-12, so thank you. The assumption is higher ed will do the same thing, that you'll have a cycle, and we'll make sure that we follow similar steps. They might be a little bit different. And then the last thing on D, it says that HEC's going to establish a date, I think, to get at what you're saying. I feel a sense of urgency, Ben feels a sense of urgency, that we want this to get accomplished and the timeline put together, because this is a P20 system, and the more you just have it for one segment, the less it feels like the system.
So would it be possible at the next board meeting that we have sort of a draft timeline for the higher ed piece as well, that at least gets the discussion going before we get too much further into the year?
I think the answer is yes. Can I just clarify when you say a draft timeline, you're referring not to the timeline for the submission process, but a timeline for the HEC work in recommendation 5, or a timeline, a proposed timeline for a compact submission and response process similar to what's included in these materials?
Well, I guess I'm less concerned of your timeline of the how, but that there be a timeline that would be somewhat similar to this, so I'm not looking for the breakout of when the individual meetings would be for the individual steps to create this, but when would you have one created by, just given we're several years into the achievement compacts?
So what we have today is a higher ed timeline that looks like this one. So there is in law and rule a timeline for the submission and response to higher ed achievement compacts. It's a slightly different timeline than for K-12, but it exists today. I think the recommendation that the OEM is considering today is that the HEC work with the institutions on potential changes to that timeline. And we are prepared to do so. We're also well along in the development of potential recommendations for the refinement to you, for the refinement to the measures for the higher ed achievement compacts. And I'd be happy to report back on both of those at the next meeting. So we can present the work that we've done.
So that would be satisfactory. I guess even just having what currently is the
Right.
law or the practice laid out, so that it doesn't just appear like the only achievement compacts that are relevant are the K-12 ones.
Then one other thing is just, Hannah, if you look, because you brought up a good point, if you look at recommendation 3A, that's about how you go out to the community. The Equity and Partnership Subcommittee is looking at a process, and I can assure you it's going to start with just asking people, not taking anything, and it's going to be asset-based, assuming everyone has great contributions to it. So I think it's really going to accomplish what you were talking about.
I will try to be very brief. First of all, I'm going to vote for the recommendations. I like the 3-year goals. I like the establishment of a different sense of place for higher education. I believe that the revisions to recommendation 3 involving the entire community are very significant and will help build social capital. I think the whole act sets large-scale direction for leadership as we change the whole system, and I'm very appreciative to my colleagues who contributed to this, and my recommendation is the usual one: let's get it on.
So I too appreciate the effort to do the revisions. I think the time we took and the thoroughness really paid off. I do have a few comments on number 1. I just want to say that I really appreciate the 3-year goal. I think that idea, I really, as I said before, loved Peter Trombo's work around that. It seemed like for the first time we were actually looking at best practice around that recommendation, as well as just kind of all the possibilities it would allow us. It also allows districts, I'm watching what's happening in my district, and we're getting better at the monitoring and adjusting. And it's real hard to do that when you only have 1 year, but when you can look out further, you can set that goal and then you can adjust. And we were one of the ones that didn't set very high goal, I tried to get us there, but my system wasn't ready to do that. And what I heard from people the second time around was, oh, we actually did that. We should have set our goal higher. So it gives a chance for those kinds of conversations. I think it also gives us the opportunity to think about all of the impact of all the work that OEIB is doing and how it's informing. I'm thinking about the question Peter just responded to. And I think it's actually going to get more difficult down the road to parcel out and say it's because of the achievement compacts that we make these gains. And I actually think that's the way it should be. It should be about the best practice we're applying to it. This is just measuring the progress that we're making. So I think there's more opportunity to have the achievement compact actually measure the work that we're doing. On number 2, I think an example we talked about today of best practice was just the idea of alignment in general in the work we're doing, but we spoke specifically about the need to do that around all the proficiency conversations that are going on. That's just one that gives us an example that we need to not only align those conversations and definitions and all the work going on, but then we also need to understand how they point to those measures on the achievement compact. So I think that the wording there and the intent on recommendation 2 will allow us to do that. I absolutely am excited about recommendation number 3, and as a superintendent, I can't wait to see that protocol and how that would inform my work in the district, because getting to really hearing all of the different groups in our community is what we need to do. And though we've had participation in some of our traditional ways, it doesn't feel a whole lot different than everything else that we've sort of done, sort of the institutional way we've done it. And so I'm really looking forward to a new way to listen to people and to feel like we've actually heard them and applied what we learned through those conversations. I think it could inform all of the work of the OEIB. So I think it's really important that it got anchored in the achievement compacts. Again, on number 4, my comment to that, analyzing the data and linking that to 3-year goal and what we learn about how we do that better when we can look out 3 years. And then my comments about number 5, I just want to emphasize that we have urgency there. I feel like we've been spinning around that one for a long time, and I understand all the reasons why, because we're still learning a lot about that. But coming from the K-12 world, I'm just hoping that we move quickly on that, as Julia was saying, because I think that it's going to be important for that work to inform all the other progress and projects that are happening at the 11 to 14. We wouldn't want to get those underway and then later on figure out, like, what do we want to measure and what are we really looking at. I'm hoping that the measures that might be suggested or at least considered are ones that are really addressing the barriers to not just completion, but also to access. And I don't need you to respond to that right now, because those are just really hopes that I'm putting out there, not questions. And I'm totally in support of the recommendations.
Rod?
Well, I'll vote yes, a few comments, and I'm supportive. Back to where Matt started, the sort of purpose here is clarity of expectations and then some impact on the achievement results. Most of what's here is still process, and it's process about setting the goals, which is the clarity part. That's great, but I don't want to shortchanging the kind of measuring the progress. You know, it's wonderful that people keep writing better and better plans, but that's not the goal. The goal isn't better and better plans. The goal is students' achievement. And so when you go through recommendation 4, it talks about identify exemplary achievement compact committees. And so, well, that's great, but the goal, again, isn't to have good committees. The goal is to have achievement. And so a little less focus on a good process and more on, are the results, in fact, you know, are people making reasonable, are they setting expectations that are reasonable? But then the real question is, are they achieving it? And if they are, wonderful, let's share those practices, get that information. That is the best practices evidence, and let's, you know, tell the world and do it. And if people are setting wonderful achievement plans with high expectations and not doing it, I don't want to reward them because they had a good process. So I look back, for instance, recommendation 4 talks about that the OEIB staff will seek feedback. I guess I circled the word seek, and I said, how about giving some feedback? You know, so that's my balance. It is a two-way street, and I really applaud the improvements, and let's have a good, you know, involved and open process that lets everybody have their input. But at the end of the day, we still got to hold people's feet to the fire about are they doing what they say.
I plan to vote for this, but I think Ronnie stole my thunder. I don't think the recommendations have enough language about outcomes and the report of those outcomes to the public, report of the outcomes to the district. I think there should be some regular expectations that the district is telling us the progress that they're making or they are not making and what they're doing about that. And I think we have an absolute obligation to say to the public what the progress is over the course of the 3 years. The language is explicit and the policy speaks to that.
Do I have anything? Okay. So, do we have a motion?
I move to,
Right, I'm sorry. Hannah, please, I'm sorry.
At some point, we talk about outcomes, but at some point, this board has to talk about inputs. We have to talk about what we're actually providing for support. Because I walked into a room full of educators yesterday, 250 of them, the stories that I hear about what they're going through every day is not acceptable. And we continue as a board to tell them we want outcomes. And yet we have not created for them a learning environment, a working environment in which they can be successful. Well, while I appreciate holding everyone accountable, that includes us. That includes this board and giving them the supports that they need. So I would just ask again, I hope that we can spend more time hearing from people who are actually in the trenches, working with our children, and seeing what they are doing to make a difference in their lives under circumstances that are not acceptable. 44 kindergartners in a full-day classroom is not acceptable for anyone. And if it were your child, it would not be okay. So I apologize, but I'm going to ask again, if we're going to talk about outcomes, I'm ready for it, but I'm also ready to talk about the inputs.
And the inputs mean what?
I'm sorry?
The input means what?
The input means the support that we provide to the schools and the educators and the students so that they can be successful.
And this is the financial support.
It's more than financial.
Okay, I'm just trying to get clarity on
Yeah.
what you're saying here, because 44 kids in a kindergarten is not acceptable. 800 kids without a home in the Beaverton School District is not acceptable. 30% poverty in African Americans is not acceptable. You know, I mean, if we're going to have the conversation, a lot of that conversation has absolutely nothing to do with the educational system. It has to do with the social circumstances that create the abysmal learning environment that the teachers have to operate in. So I'm happy to have the conversation, but it needs to be a holistic conversation. It's like talking about health and only talking about hospitals.
I'm ready to have that conversation, but it's time for us to talk about the inputs as well as we're talking about what we want. Because there's no one sitting here that doesn't have high expectations and believe that every child should be taken through an education that provides them an opportunity for success. That means different things, and it means different investments. But the districts and the educators are working extremely hard. If someone's not doing their job, we just spent hundreds of hours working on evaluation tools for administrators and for educators. Let's use them. I don't want anyone working with a child in our schools that's not doing the right thing, but they're working extremely hard. And sometimes I feel like we sit here and we talk about outcomes and we don't think about the realities. And I really implore us, we need now more than ever to come together and do the right thing for the students in Oregon.
I'd like to say, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but when you talk to parents and you talk to older students, they really want outcomes. And I think that's why we're here. We really want our kids to be able to perform well at whatever level they are in the educational process, and definitely to perform well once they graduate from college or from whatever advanced career they had. I don't think we can have this conversation without talking about the outcomes that are most important for students and for their parents. And we're going to support educators. I don't think anyone here is anti-educators. But we have got to keep that as our number one goal, is that we're looking for performance, and our students and parents are expecting that of every part of the educational process.
That
So
list-
outcomes for our students.
As I listen to this, I kind of think of the what and the how. I think what the outcomes you're talking about, that's the what. And that's what the conversation is today. I think Hannah's made a very, very compelling point on the how. It is a little bit later. So I believe today we're voting on the what, which are the achievement compacts, and I'll move acceptance of the achievement compacts. Recommendation as presented.
Second.
Okay. Discussion, Matt, you had your hand up.
Well, I was going to say, just a couple comments and stepping back a little bit. I think Thomas, you're completely supportive of what Anna's saying, as well as what Kay's saying. And that is, we often describe, and the Governor heard from me a lot, the functioning of this board should be that of a strategic investor, and the functioning of the state should be that of a strategic investor. And I would look forward to the day when these achievement compacts can be used to really facilitate an investment discussion like Hannah's talking about, where we're really saying, if we had an extra dollar, if we had an extra tranche of investment available, where would we get the greatest bang for the buck on behalf of these kids that we're doing? So I think that I like this process. I'm outcomes driven this, but I think the process, hopefully, as we look ahead, can really facilitate that function of being a strategic investor, because I think that's exactly right. We need to invest more, and I think hopefully this can illuminate where those investments can have the greatest uplift.
Anyone else? Okay. It's been moved. I'm sorry, do you have?
That was just a call for the question.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we adopt the recommendations. Is there further discussion? Is there objection? It's ordered. The next item is an update on our early learning hubs. I think one of the reasons we're doing this, and so we have some other people who are going to join you. Is that correct, Mark?
Yes. I've invited Mark and then my colleagues Zeke Smith and Heidi McGowan, so why don't you
There we
come to
go.
the table?
Mark, Zeke Smith and Heidi McGowan, right? And we thought it would just be a good opportunity because I think people's direct experience with what's going on with the hubs is not all at the same level, and we wanted to kind of get everyone on the same page and provide an opportunity to learn what's going on up there, what the future holds, and then to entertain any questions or comments that the members have. So that'll turn over to you.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Governor, and thank you, Dr. Golden, and members of the board for inviting us here to talk about early learning hubs. Today, what do I to get into? Of course. Where do I click the cookie? Oh, it's not on. So today we're going to keep things relatively high level. For those of you who like to hang out in the weeds, we provided you some weedy material in advance. So you actually have a chart that shows you for each hub that we've awarded a contract to or have noticed them of our intent to award them a contract. You can see who they are, you can see who the contact person for that hub is, what the backbone organization is when they got to contract, and the projects they're actually working on. In the interest of time today, we are going to stay higher level. I'm going to do a little bit of a level set just to make sure that everybody is operating from the same place of understanding what an early learning hub is. And then we've invited colleagues who are actually leading this work on the ground in their communities to talk to you about what they're doing. I think that understanding this kind of community collaborative is best understood by hearing from the people on the ground who are doing the work than hearing from the kind of systems level agency bureaucrat. And then the third thing we'll do is talk to you a little bit about some of the lessons that we've learned and hear what questions you have for us as we're thinking about what the future of this initiative looks like. I'm really excited to have the chance to engage in this work. I've been working on the launch and the early implementation of the hubs since I joined the agency in May 2013. And to me, it's one of the initiatives that we have across the state that really highlights the theory of change that the governor's been leading around the role of government in not existing to fix problems, but existing to create the space for people to solve problems for themselves and their community. And when I think about what it means to create the space, I just want to say, of course, it means providing adequate resources for folks to be able to do the work. It also means giving them time to do the work, especially if the work you're asking them to do requires building relationships in new ways with people who have never worked together before in many cases. And I also think it means providing clear direction and really strong support in line with the conversation that just happened around the achievement compacts. So like I said, I'm going to start out with a quick orientation around what early learning hubs are, and then you're going to get to hear from the folks who are really doing the work. Early learning hubs were created in order to make the resources in early childhood more available, more accessible to populations of children and families who have never had access to resources before, and more effective for children and families excuse me, who have historically been overrepresented in the achievement gap, underrepresented in service availability, sort of overrepresented in disparities. And the hubs are tasked to really work with the state as our partners in building a much more coherent and cohesive early learning system out of what frankly has traditionally been a patchwork of programs and a patchwork of services. I need to point out that over the last year, there are 14 early learning hubs that have been developed across the state, with 2 more that we expect to bring to contract by the end of this biennium. And the oldest one of those 14 is 10 months old. At this time last year, no hubs were under contract. We had just finished our first round of bids and were in a contract negotiation. And the youngest hub signed its contract 3 weeks ago. So when we talk about building an early learning system out of what used to be a patchwork of programs, I would say we're still very much building that system with a couple of areas that we've really noticed we need to be a lot sharper on. One of those areas is equity. And so I just want to make sure that this board knows the Early Learning Council has chartered equity subcommittee that will be bringing forward recommendations in March to the council around how we can really make sure that the system that we set up is set up in a way that allows us to achieve our goals instead of setting up a system that functions the same way that the old system functioned. We take the work of this equity committee so seriously that in the draft version of the Early Learning Council's strategic plan that they'll adopt in a few weeks, there's actually a goal that the council will be accountable to, that 100% of our early learning hubs are actively implementing the recommendations from the equity committee. Another thing that we've learned over the last year, and I'll talk a little bit more about this after our local colleagues have the chance to speak, is the need to be even sharper and more clear on the metrics that we're using for accountability for the hubs. So kind of mirrors the conversation that just happened around the achievement compacts. And to that end, we convened a metrics committee that met beginning in August and met all the way through December every other week for that period of months to develop a set of principles around what we should be measuring, because what you measure drives behavior on the ground, and then to develop a set of short and long-term indicators that we can hold hubs accountable to in their contracts. So those are just 2 things that emerged over the last year as we've been working to lift this system up as being really important, and I'll talk about them a little more later, but wanted to preview them up front. So just so that folks know what hubs actually are supposed to do, I always talk about hubs as having 4 core responsibilities. The first is to identify the population of children in their communities most at risk of arriving at kindergarten unprepared for school. And that language comes right out of statute, and there are statutory definitions of at risk. The second responsibility that they have is to identify the specific needs of those populations of children and families. And then third, they're charged with working across sectors. They have to work across health, human services, early childhood, K-12, and the private sector. And as you'll hear from Zeke, some hubs have added a 6th sector of community-based organizations. They're charged with working across all of those sectors to connect children and families to services that will meet their needs. And then finally, they're responsible for accounting for outcomes collectively. And you can see here the high-level outcomes that the hubs are charged with achieving. Creating a cohesive early learning system, ensuring that children arrive at school ready to succeed, and ensuring that our children are raised in families that are stable, healthy, and attached. I've gotten a lot of questions over the last year about what we mean by some of those goals, so I won't read this slide to you, but I did want to put into the record how the metrics committee has started to define what we mean when we say children are supported to enter school ready to succeed. You can see that here. And what we mean when we say that families are healthy, stable, and attached. I just think that's important for folks to be able to see. The other thing I think is important contextually is to remember why we're doing this work, to talk about why. And the reason for me is the 200,000 or so children from age 0 to 5 who live in our state and are exposed to a variety of risk factors. And these slides are just meant to show you how many children are born a year, how many children are born on Medicaid and are facing adversity. This is the reason why we do this work. The other reason why, which is much wonkier and more systems-y, is that this is how our early learning system looked historically prior to the reforms of the past 4 years. Pretty chaotic. You can imagine trying, as a mom or a dad, trying to navigate this system to find services that your children need. And this is the system that we've moved to today, much more streamlined, with still plenty of work to do, but you can see at the community level, direct service providers and early learning hubs working hand in hand with the early learning division to find more streamlined, more effective ways to identify children and families and connect them to the services that they need. Before I transition over to Mark, since he's up out of his chair, the final thing that I want to just highlight is that the Early Learning Council has a core belief that I think is very in line with the perspective of this board and with the governor's office, that local communities are the ones that possess the greatest understanding of the issues facing their children, and they have the best knowledge around how to reach those families and push toward those outcomes that you saw a second ago. And so the council elected to approach its work around building the early learning hub system through the same loose, tight frame that this board has approached the regional projects like the regional achievement compacts. So the Early Learning Council has really focused on setting expectations for both communities and the early learning providers who we contract with directly. The division that I run contracts with a suite of early learning providers, and we're working to align the expectations we have for providers with the expectations we have for hubs. The council has set a frame to guide the work, and then we're setting expectations around outcomes and progress. So we see it as our role to set that clear frame and then do everything we possibly can to support community leaders to be successful in achieving the goals that they develop locally. And so with that, I'm going to give you the chance to hear from a couple of our community leaders, first Mark and then Zeke, and then I'll pick back up with just a couple of themes, things that we've learned, things that I think are important for you to consider as you're discovering what it means to have a system of early learning hubs in our state.
Yep.
Can we ask questions or do
Yep.
you want to straight to the end?
Yeah, go for it.
Right ahead.
So I just had a question on that last slide, the sort of more rationalized structure for the early learning. So if you were a parent, where would your interaction with the system be? Would it be through your direct service providers or the early learning hubs? I'm assuming they're not going to be, it's not with ODE or OHS or DHS. What is like the sort of parent-friendly, especially if it's your first child, the whole maze is, whether it's childcare or getting your child ready for kindergarten, is hard to navigate. So how do they access it?
I can answer that too when we get
Sure.
to ours, when you're ready.
Yeah, so the interaction with parents is at the provider level, and ideally the early learning division and even eventually the early learning hubs are in the background, supporting parents to be able to better find access to those services. Right now, we have a system that's historically funded programs, and then we fund our programs. They're good programs. We hope that the people who need them can find their way to them, but we have lacked, and frankly, since we're still building the system, still in many ways lack a coherent way for families who need service to find their way there. So right now, if you find it and you're income eligible, you're lucky enough to get the service. And then if you don't find it, or you don't know if you're income eligible, or you're just above the federal poverty level, we really don't have a lot that we're offering you. And that's the problem we're trying to solve for. But my goal would be that the parents are interacting with providers who are well equipped to meet the needs of their families, and the role of the bureaucracy is really just in the background as a funder.
Mark has to leave at 2:30.
Mark,
Okay.
did you want to share a perspective on that as both a provider
Well,
and
I'll hit it right in here.
Okay.
Here we go. Can we go?
Yep.
The only reason I'm asking is I have a board meeting at 5:45 in Hermiston, so if nobody tells our local law enforcement, I'll make it on time.
For that?
Don't call any buddies.
The word has been spread.
Don't call any buddies in Arlington.
This is I-84, right?
Exactly, exactly. You guys look pretty good up there, I might add, too. Megan asked me to present very quickly, and I'm just going to give you some nuts and bolts and do a flyby on what our hub looks like, which is probably fairly common to a lot of the rural ones, and then some different nuances, I'm sure, with Zeke. So, very first slide, if you would. And the one you have in front of you on paper, there's a couple missing slides, so if you can maybe look at the computer, that'd be great. Okay, this was our biggest decision we had to make. It took us over 4 months to get a logo. It was quite a process. But really, what was interesting about the formation of the hub, and I've used this metaphor several times, that we've spent several years actually forming the planet, and right now we're actually putting life on the planet. And we have some outcomes. I knew, Ron, you'd want some outcomes, so I'm going to show you these.
All of us want some outcomes.
I know, yeah. I just harassing you. But basically, we spent several years on seeing who wants to play together. Because the definitions of the hubs, the state was not coming in on a white horse to say, this is your group. It was chosen by who you wanted to work together. I think it was beautiful. It was messy and it was difficult, but I think in the end result, the hubs that we have right now have a collaborative effect by going through that process. So our hub is the Blue Mountain Early Learning Hub, and it encompasses 3 counties in eastern Oregon, Umatilla, Morrow, and Union. There's 10,000 kids there, birth to 5. Of those 10,000, 7,600 are at risk. Of those 7,600, only 30% of them are in some sort of a program to assist them before kindergarten. Our hub goal, pretty clear, to go after the remaining 70%. That slide reiterates that. We've used what I just said as a talking point. That really resonates when people say, what is a hub? A hub is coordinating the governmental services, the state services, the nonprofits, anything for the kids from prenatal to kindergarten, to 3rd grade. Ours actually is that long, but birth to 5, there's 10,000 kids, 7,600 at risk. And those are identified in a variety of different mannerisms. It may be poverty, it may be handicapping conditions. It's a lot of kids that need a lot of help. Okay, next slide. There's our framework and governance. What you see, we have a unique governance structure. We have 2 co-leads. That's not very common. I believe we're the only one, Megan, where Intermountain ESD and Umatilla Morrow Head Start, which are the 2 largest service providers in eastern Oregon. Intermountain, we actually have the EI-ECSE contract where we cover 7 counties. Umatilla Morrow Head Start covers 10. And what we said from day one is we're not going to have turfdom. We're going to have co-leadership. This is such a huge lift, such a huge effort that we will be united as one to move forward for our kids. And since we're the largest providers, it makes sense that we join at the hip, and we've done that very successfully. We set up a governance structure where we have representation from each one of the 3 counties. That includes anywhere from county commissioners to a wide wealth of health services, to DHS, to the community colleges. We can go on and on, but pretty much everybody. The hub is a huge lift. When I tell people, compare this to the Eastern Promise, I think the Eastern Promise is going to pale in comparison to how big an effort this hub is going to be. Next slide. So scope of focus, very similar to the slide that Megan has. What our hub is, besides, you think those 10,000 kids, 7,600 risk, but what we've done is a couple little different nuances. We've said that our hub is a 9-year program. It's prenatal, in the womb, all the way to 3rd grade reading. And we're looking at 3rd grade reading as our graduation. And we're looking at children developmentally in the first 18 years of their life in 2 sections. And the end point for the first 9 years is, do they know how to read? Into 3rd grade reading, then it transitions to 4th grade, reading to learn. So what we've said is we're going to have a graduation in 3rd grade reading is the #1 indicator, and that's going to be how we're going to evaluate our hub. From prenatal to 9 years old, 3rd grade reading is the indicator. Next slide. Why 3rd grade reading proficiency? We've talked about this a lot. It's our #1 return on investment. We know what the research shows, that if the student does not know how to learn to read, they're not going to read to learn. And so putting all of that effort in a preventative model is what we're after. Next slide. So if you think, this helps people understand what a hub is. If you think of it going down, there are the three sectors: health, safety, and education. Going across on the horizontal axis, we've got the 0 to 3 and the 3 to 3. So 0 to 3 is prenatal to age 3. 3 to 3 is age 3 to 3rd grade. So we have set and established outcomes in health, safety, and education for each one of those sections. Health is going to dominate the hub. As I've learned a lot, particular oral health, immunizations, I've definitely learned a lot on the health aspect with children of this age. We also have, so our health goals primarily is oral health is what we're starting with. We're really going after that, and immunizations, well baby checks. Safety, we have 2 indicators. We're working tightly with DHS. They're heavily involved in the hub. Reduction of child abuse, neglect, and we're also using foster care as an indicator for our safety outcomes. In education, we've kept it pretty tight. It's going to be the kindergarten assessment. It's going to be 3rd grade reading. Next slide. Primary goal.
I was going to just do you have your VA, sheriff, or juvenile judge on your hub? In your hub?
Not in the hub right now. We have it in our wraparound. Once they start, just haven't gotten there yet. But you've given me food for thought there with now. Okay, primary goal, as you can see, those are the ones I just kind of did a flyby there. You see the reduction of child care. These are our current initiatives. This is the first life on the planet. We've spent a lot of time forming and norming. Now these are our first life forms, okay? Our biggest one that we're just really excited, we received the Kindergarten Innovation Grant, and we targeted 35 of our top early learning teachers. Top ones we could get as a train-to-trainer capacity building model. Some of these are kindergarten teachers, some of these are 2nd grade teachers, some of these are Head Start, or ECSE, some of them are private daycare. And they're in a 1.5 year long training as professional learning community. We brought in the Houghton Mifflin Leading and Learning Center. They're a national group to provide the training as well. But it's a capacity building, and we're aligning our curriculum with Common Core, and we're aligning our assessments, birth to 3. And we're pretty excited because we've got some real talented experts working on that we're kind of going with our best and brightest model right off the bat. Keep that one, Seth, go back. Mini mailbox libraries, that's really, really a cool little initiative. And again, I'm learning all this stuff with early learning. But these are libraries, mailboxes located in neighborhoods, 4 neighborhoods, where families can just check out books on the honor code, and you know what happens. They disappear. That's a good thing because they're getting into the house. But we actually have our retired librarians in the region stocking these and continuing to make sure that the books are there. And we have a variety of resources paying for that. Learning picnics, this is a really cool one too. Received a grant for this where we actually have picnics and learning opportunities where you go into the neighborhoods. And we're targeting our high poverty areas in 3 counties where we come in and we have a picnic with food and we talk to them, and here's where the navigators come in. Okay? So we are doing an extensive training that anybody who has part of system navigation in their job, we're going to have a regional training here on March 6th. And most folks have this as part of their FTE. We're not creating navigators. We're saying, you already do this at DHS, right? You already do this with early intervention. We use the example that we had one single parent mom who watched 3 state agency people come and assess their child on the same day and pass each other on the sidewalk, and finally the 3rd one she says, when are you guys going to get your act together? Which is true. We're all 3 different entities never talking to each other, testing the same child. We use that as a case example of inefficiency. So we're going to have a massive training at Wild Horse on anybody you have, Annie, your person up, who does system navigation, so that they know about the hub, they know what the intersection points are. Parent education, a big piece of this. The ASQ is a huge indicator that we're going after. Oral health is gigantic. Ready for Kindergarten is a program actually out of the Tri-Cities that we've adopted to prepare parents for kindergarten. So how are our outcomes if you look on this last page? This is what we've done as our first life forms that I could measure for you as of January 12, right before the duck game. 1,700 dental kits and oral health messages have been distributed. We're creating an app connecting to parents. All parents have a cell phone. All parents have an app. We're going to have a Blue Mountain Early Learning Hub app with instant messaging on what's available with immunizations, what's available with this and that. Approximately 31% of our kids are accessing quality early learning program. 27 of those have been screened with ASQ. ASQ is a huge indicator by the state. That's one of our indicators. Talked already about the learning grant, 35 child care providers, preschool K-2. It's really exciting to see the private sector child care providers getting on board with the Common Core, getting on board with kindergarten assessment, and starting to work with their kids. 1,200 Ready to Learn cards. We've talked about Ready to Learn card before, where kids, every time they swipe, they get a card, parents get a card. Every time they swipe that at any of our professional development activities, whether it's the mobile library, the neighborhood mailboxes, whatever, if they swipe, then they get 2 cents put into the Oregon College Savings Plan program. That's been very, very successful. Obviously, we want more than 2 cents, but the key is that they're starting to think about it and have an account. Learning picnics, you can see the stats there that have been a big indicator. So, in summary, what we've learned with the hub, and as a superintendent, it's not all about education. It's about health. It's about safety in the home. Learned a lot of that. Learned that this is about, the hub is all about not bringing in more resources, it's coordinating the ones you already have better in a more deliberate, systemic way. And a lot of that is where Julia hit the nail on the head is, what are our systems in place that every single parent knows what's available in their community already? And how are we reaching out to our most vulnerable families and communicating with them and actually bringing those services into the home? Those are our targets, and I think we're off to a good start. It's a heavy lift.
So that the board knows, the Blue Mountain Early Learning Hub has been under contract only since August. So this is a tremendous amount, and to be fair, they were organizing themselves before, and this is a huge community organizing effort. But I just think that's a tremendous amount of progress being in contract since August. It looked like there was a question for Mark, sorry.
Well just done, by the way. Quick question, and that, Mark, is what's happening for the Latino community, particularly those whose first language is not English?
When you looked at the learning picnics and actually going into the homes, that's been the biggest one. The Latino communities who we're targeting, especially on the west end of Umatilla County. In fact, we're having more success with them initially than we are in some of the other areas. Because what's interesting is some of the areas, and in our area, there's definitely some conservative folks that look at it, in a way that the first 5 years, that's the home, which, there's some definitely truth to that. So what we're finding is there's a little bit of wariness on what is this hub thing coming into your community that we're working within in the rural areas, which we'll work through. What we're seeing to move that dial is working with county commissioners. County commissioners hold a lot of weight, and getting them on board with the hub, the Eastern Promise, these initiatives, that these are resource and it's networking. It's not, I'm not going into your budget, I'm just networking better. The support is there. But as far as the Latino population, predominantly Umatilla, Boardman, Milton Freewater, that's where we're getting our biggest lift, right? That's where a lot of those statistics are.
Hey, Mark, I have a quick question. Just when it comes to K-12 and post-secondary, we've developed these achievement compacts specifically for clarity of expectations. When you look at early learning, far more fragmented service provider network, if you will. I'm not suggesting that we necessarily get achievement compacts with each institution, but however we do it, how are we going to achieve that same level of a common understanding around expectations on early learning that we're trying to achieve on K-12 and post-secondary? At the individual service provider level. So most very outcomes focused applaud that. As we think about the very fragmented individual service provider network, how do we get the same level of clarity around expectations?
I was sitting right over there thinking in this conversation that I believe we need some sort of achievement indicator, whether it's a compact or not, but along the same line for the hubs. I don't see, again, it's just me, my opinion on it, where you're going with this is, these agencies need to have common outcomes as well. If we're going to move the dial on third grade reading and kindergarten assessment, everybody in the early learning world has to have a component. It's the collective impact. It's like I was saying earlier, is like what we're finding in the hub, which will emerge very quickly, is attendance, school attendance. That is one people can buy into immediately that the hub has talked about. I think we could have 4 or 5 indicators for early learning that are up there that can be common, that we can support the hubs with.
And if I could just tag on to that, Mark's absolutely right. So for the hubs, there is a set of indicators that will go forward to the Early Learning Council for approval at their meeting in 2 weeks that are specific to hubs and their contracts. There's also a group that's going to be making recommendations around a child well-being scorecard for the state of Oregon. Because when you're talking about early learning service providers, it's not just the ones that are within the early learning division. There's health and human services. So how do you herd those cats together? So the vision is that we'll use the child well-being scorecard as that sort of overarching frame. And then as an agency director, I plan to align what we're requiring from the core early learning services that we fund with what we're requiring from hubs so that those partnerships can actually really start to form around the same kind of accountability. So with that, so you've heard from a rural hub, and Mark has to go probably. I wanted to also have folks have the chance to hear from Early Learning Multnomah and Early Learning Washington County, both of which are convened by the United Way of the Columbia Willamette, which I think is a really exciting model for this kind of innovative work that we're trying to do. So Zeke, I'll let you introduce yourself and take it away.
Great, thanks. Zeke Smith with the United Way of the Columbia Willamette, and I do have the pleasure today of being in front of you to share a little bit about both Early Learning Multnomah and Early Learning Washington County, as Megan had mentioned. So we're in a distinct or unique position of co-convening in each of those different hubs. So we co-convene in Multnomah County with the county, Health and Human Services, or Human Services, and then in Washington County with the Department of Health and Human Services. So a lot of what Mark said applies, actually, even though we're in a different context. One of the things he talked about is that in Blue Mountain, they have a co-convening structure between their organization and the Head Start agency. In both of our hubs, we have a similar co-convening structure between the counties and then United Way. We've been in place as a hub. We've been under contract, I should say, in Multnomah County since May, and we've been under contract in Washington County since November. As Megan said, there's a lot of work that went into getting to that point, but it does give you a sense of kind of the early development of the process. And we were asked early on by leadership at Multnomah County to play a co-convening role there. There was recognition that we were looking to play a different kind of role than we had in the community. We felt like important for us to continue to be an organization that can aggregate resources to have an impact, but that we also have a role in being a part of the solution making around problem solving. So it was a great opportunity for us. 6 months later or so, as the second round of applications were going in, stakeholders in Washington County also asked us to play a similar role. Puts us in a unique position to think about where there's opportunity to scale across the two counties. But also we have to be really intentional about the fact that they look really differently. So part of what I want to share with you is a couple of examples of where there are some distinctions between the two. At-risk population, each of the hubs were asked to define locally what the at-risk population was and then to justify that. We came up with these two figures for Multnomah and Washington County: 34,000 0 through 6-year-olds in Multnomah County and 30,000 in Washington County. In each case, that puts us right around 50% of the overall 0 to 6-year-old population. A couple things to note about how we derived those numbers. So background, Multnomah County has the largest concentration of African American and Native American community members in counties in the state. Washington County has the largest concentrations of Hispanic and Asian populations. So in both cases, communities of color are critical and important parts of those communities. We also know that kids of color are disproportionately living in poverty broadly, and we know that communities of color disproportionately do not benefit from the systems as they're currently designed that are about combating poverty or increasing success. We also know that those issues, while they happen nationally, are acute in realities in Oregon. So we have, in many cases, worse indicators for communities of color than the rest of the nation does. And we know that in Multnomah and Washington counties, those are also acute in the state. So I'm creating a context for thinking about communities of color largely as being at risk given the way that our systems currently are designed in our state. And we also know that they're acute when we think about outcomes for kids at the early years of their lives. So in both of these communities, the stakeholders decided that when we think about at risk, we're both talking about poverty, so we're talking about class, and we're also talking about communities of color, because the reality is, as a 0 for 6-year-old of color in these two counties in this state, you are at risk of not seeing the same successes as other communities because of the way the systems have currently been designed. I say all that because I think it's really important to both acknowledge the equity policy that you all put in place and how that was helpful as we engaged in our local communities around how to target our efforts and target our resources. Our job at the Hub is to coordinate and align in many of the ways that we heard Mark talk about. But this has also created an opportunity for us to be more intentional about how our resources really focus in the ways that impact the disparities and the issues that we care about. So each of our missions actually are focused on those issues. So next slide. I think the other key distinction in terms of what the hubs have created at the local level, in many ways building on, I think, what has been this governor's focus on regionalizing or localizing the solutions to problems, has been, as you heard from Mark, which sectors are at the table. So having our CCO leadership at the table in a different makes a difference, because many of the issues we understand for this population and for their families are health-based issues. And they have been critically at the table in both of our hubs. Having K-12 superintendents at the table in both communities matters and makes a difference. I would put in a plug, as Mark said in Blue Mountain, they're thinking about this as not just a kindergarten readiness issue, but thinking about third grade reading as a key metric. We're thinking the same way in both Washington County and Multnomah. That does two things. I think, one, it ties us to the research that you all know very well. Secondly, I think it invests our K-12 systems even more intentionally in the work that we're doing and how we think about early learning. And so as we move forward, I think that's one of those places where creating more of a blended transition, and particularly as institutions are paying attention to that and the outcomes that are there, really matter. So 3 examples of what we're doing on the ground. One of them I did not bring specific outcomes in the same way Mark did. I should have. But I did bring some materials for your attention. So I'm not going to give them to you yet, but before I leave, I'm going to hand them over to Nicole and she can pass them out. We have an early literacy grant, and in that grant, what we've done locally is created a set of early literacy kits. What's unique about that is really the degree to which community partners in our hub are viewed as experts. So the recognition is that community partners have a unique ability to be a part of the solutions as we pay attention to some of these key issues. So to do that, Multnomah County Library, using the Every Child Ready to Read program, engaged under our leadership with the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization, Native American Youth and Family Center, Kairos PDX, Latino Network, and Children's Book Bank to take an existing approach that's evidence-based to how we increase early literacy skills for kids, but to contextualize it to the communities that we want to target. So to really think about African Americans, Native Americans, Latinos, and Russian-speaking families as they're engaging and supporting their kids. So what you'll see is we've got a set of both booklets and then these kind of slide wheels, which takes a pretty commonly accepted approach to early learning, that, as I said, is evidence-based, but then really contextualizes it in those communities. When I say contextualize it, I don't mean takes the information and then translates it into Spanish. What I mean is that those partners at the table with the library saying, how do we take the information that we know in terms of what works and apply it within this culture? So how do we use stories? How do we use songs from those specific communities? So when you look through these, what you'll see is you'll see different booklets that are created for each of those communities. The African American culturally specific booklet created by Kairos is not the same as the one that the library had initially created, and is neither the same as the one that NAEA created for the Native American community. The stories are different, the songs are different, some of the approaches are different. What's universal is that they're still built on what we know to be best practice, both from an evidence-based standpoint that we think of in a scientific space, but also from a community-based standpoint. And I think this gets to some degree at your question earlier, Julia, about where do parents really touch the hubs? Well, what we know right now is parents, particularly in the communities that we're targeting, touch our hubs with those providers for whom they see the most connectivity and where they feel welcome. So in both cases, in both communities, we've really focused on how do we bring those partners to the table and how do we have them be a part of the solution with us. So this is one of the examples. The second example is that we're supporting what we call a community education worker model. We're using kindergarten innovation and partnership grant resources to support this. It takes a community health worker model, which is fairly well established in the health community, which is one that our CCOs have been investing in, that our Oregon Health Authority has been investing in, where you've got trained individuals in some of the same community partners, a few different ones, and then creating a set of modules that have more of an education-based focus for them to engage families in the community. So the Multnomah County Community Capacitation Center has built a set of modules in partnership with NAEA again, the Urban League, the Latino Network, to support 9 individuals who are working in 3 school communities: Clarendon, Glen Fair, which is in the Reynolds School District, and then Lynchwood in the Centennial community. So I've mentioned those schools because, again, it's also about how are we focusing those resources in communities geographically where we know that the issues are most significant as well. Both of those examples are in Multnomah County. I think that they both speak to the value we have around community partners as experts, and we're really excited about the specific kinds of outcomes that we're going to see as parents and families and kids are engaged with those. The example I want to give you in Washington County is around the family resource managers. There was an existing family resource system across the 7 school districts in Washington County, funded at a fairly minimal level, funded with both commission resources from the state previously and some resources from the county. And the family resource centers were providing kind of broadly supports for families in those school communities or in those districts. We, through the hub, have done 2 things to change that. One is that we're targeting those resources towards 0 through 6-year-olds and their families. So they're still school-based, but they're really about supporting the kids that are moving their way into those schools and those families. And secondly, we're providing base funding, so there's this kind of universal application, trying to build a universal system, but we're also, again, targeting resources. So we've looked at each of the 7 school districts and said, what are the actual number of at-risk students in those school districts? And then we have differential funding in that family resource management system to support those school districts that have the heaviest concentration of at-risk students. It's not a lot of money because we're on the front end of this system, but our ability to think about how do we universally create supports for families, but how do we also target and in particular pay attention to where the disparities are most significant is, I think, the kind of energy that has really blossomed in both of the hubs in Multnomah County and in Washington County. So we're really excited about that. And then the last piece I'd say about that family resource management system in Washington County is it both was looking at the school district level where we have the most at-risk kids, but we've also said which schools are the most acutely impacted by those issues. So there are 16 schools in Washington County, elementary, where 50% of the population or more are Spanish speakers at home, and 50% of the population or more are on free and reduced lunch. And we're focusing again on applying the resources in those particular places. So I call that all out because I think it's in alignment with the values that you all have set collectively. There's definitely a focus on outcomes. I think to Mr. Donegan's question, the metrics, as Megan said, that are put in place at the hub level frame an ability for us to think collectively about a set of outcomes that are not just about what the hub's doing, because the hub in essence is coordination and alignment, but how we're really organizing our community-based resources more effectively to meet the needs of kids and their families.
And I would just highlight that is a very different way of thinking about organizing the work than early learning has previously experienced. And still, to a certain degree, people who run programs think about their programs versus how to target resources for the good of a community in the way that Zeke just described. So while this is an emerging body of work, I think that's a really important, the things that Zeke highlighted are really important themes. Yes.
Just as a sub-note, Zeke, and I'm hearing great things about it. We in Multnomah and Washington County have a significant, we don't even know how much, but a significant portion of homeless kids or kids that live with their families in cars and in a variety of other places. And we sort of never really drilled down on that. It'd be helpful as we go forward to sort of see. I know that the resource managers have been around, for actually about 12 years under the old Commission on Children and Family System. But it'd be really helpful to see what's happening with these kids because they tend to fall below the radar line, or probably a bad metaphor. I don't do radar, but we don't have a sense of what happens to them, but we have a sense of what happens to them after they can't read in the third grade, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, if for me, it might be helpful when we come back to this to kind of see what's happening in terms of the kids that don't usually get the kind of attention they need.
Yeah, I think one of the opportunities that we have both at the local hub level, but then in partnership with the state, is to be intentional about how on a regular basis we're presenting, in essence, what's the state of 0 through 6-year-olds and their families in our communities. What do we know about how many of them are homeless? What do we know about how many of them are being impacted by other issues of poverty? And then what are we seeing are the practices that are actually starting to impact that differently? And what kinds of system changes do we need to make? And it's one of the places where, because of this new structure, I think we have an opportunity to both tell that story across the state, but also to be really smart about how local communities have different issues which present themselves in different ways, and we've got to elevate our ability to both address those issues, but also to make them visible.
And to the conversation earlier about inputs, one of the things that I love the most about early learning, where I get really excited, is that if you are a person who wants to impact all of the social determinants or things that impact learning once a child enters the K-12 system, early childhood is a place where you can do that, and in fact you're expected to talk about how we're supporting families, how we're supporting social emotional development, health, and cognitive development. So it just creates a wonderful space for a lot of the things that this board was talking about a little bit earlier. Just in the interest of time, I want to wind down so that we can get to everyone else's questions, because I imagine there are still some others. Wanted the board to be able to see how the hubs have spread across the state. Everyone in blue is under contract or in the final stages of contract negotiation with the division and the council. The two communities in the salmon color are the ones where we're providing a significant amount of technical assistance and support to help them get to a place where the Early Learning Council feels ready to offer them a contract, and our target for that is by the end of this biennium. Here's just another way of displaying it. You have this on your grid as well. This is the path that got us here legislatively. I want to highlight again just how emergent this system is. You've been hearing about early learning hubs since 2011 because that's when it emerged as a policy conversation. The legislation that enabled us to create them was not passed until July 2013, and so we're still establishing them across the state. The final slide that I think I want to just land on and then take questions from the group is this piece around metrics. So again, as I said, I believe that the things that you hold people accountable for drive behavior on the ground. And so we wanted to pull together, the first set of metrics we pulled together out of necessity in order to put a request for proposal process together. And some of them have been really helpful in forging collaboration on the ground. As we reflected on what we wanted to do in our next round of contracts, we took a step back to figure out what are the short and long-term indicators that we can hold people responsible for that will drive the kind of behavior that we want to see, and what's a core set of principles behind those measurements. Because the Early Learning Council doesn't get the chance to review or adopt those metrics until 2 weeks from now, I didn't feel comfortable bringing that forward to this board before I took it to my board. But I did feel comfortable at least sharing the core principles behind the metrics, and so you can see the way that we're really starting to shape our thinking behind the policies that we're helping drive through the hub process. So I'll leave that up, and then we're really interested to take questions. Heidi's here with me because, to be honest, she does much more on the ground day-to-day work with the early learning hubs than I do at this point, and so I wanted to have somebody with a real perspective to answer questions, since mine tends to be a little bit higher level. And then Zeke does this work every day in 2 communities, so he's happy to take questions too. Yep.
Could you just elaborate on one small piece before we go into more general questions? So there's the hub work, and I really appreciate and thank you for that description. I think that's the most complete and helpful description I've heard yet, and it sounds really exciting and wonderful. But then there's all of these other long-term contracted services around early childhood that continue to happen through the state that are not necessarily put through the hubs. And it seems like there's some emerging data that shows that there are deep and prolific disparities in what low-income communities do and do not get served. And so can you just maybe spend a little bit of time helping us to understand how these long-term contracted services connect with the hub, and also the longer plan around remedying some of those deep disparities that exist in those services, since those actually represent the vast majority of dollars being invested in early learning that this board oversees?
Yes, I'm really glad that you asked that question. So just for base knowledge, there are a set of programs that the Early Learning Division administers: the Oregon Pre-Kindergarten Program, state-funded Early Head Start, a home visiting program called Healthy Families Oregon, and the Relief Nursery Program. And then we co-administer with DHS employment-related daycare. And so what Nicole's referring to is disparity in who's accessing those programs. Everybody who's accessing them is low income. You have to be in order to access those services, with the exception of home visiting, which takes other risk factors into consideration as well. So there's racial and ethnic disparities in who's accessing those programs. This is something that the Early Learning Division has in the last 4 months, really started to dig into the data around, starting to get really clear about where those disparities exist and what they look like in our programs. And we're developing a set of contracts for the next biennium that will have requirements in those contracts related to serving a population proportionate to the population of children from birth to 5 within your community. There's more to come on that. We're still developing what does that boilerplate look like. We want to be careful that what we're thinking inside the agency aligns with the recommendations that the equity committee of our council are going to put forward. But we're really concerned about those disparities and looking at what do we need to ask for in contracts with our providers in order to start to address it. I think we also need to think about who we're contracting with, and if we're contracting with entities who are equipped to address populations of kids that maybe they don't have as much cultural competency in working with. So those are all questions that they're still sort of open questions. We know we're going to do something about it, and we're mapping out the process for what we're going to do through the contracting process. And then the other place that I think the contracts will be important is how we ask service providers to work hand in hand with their hubs. In a lot of places across the state, I would say almost all, I've been actually surprised at the leap of faith that providers have taken with their hubs. Zeke, you can talk more about what this has looked like on the ground for you, but we've found actually folks a lot more willing to work together with no real financial incentive to do so than you might have expected.
And can you give this board a sense of how many dollars are invested in the ongoing current activities in early learning, and how many dollars we've invested to date in the hub systems, just so we have a sense? Because
So across, and I was going to get there, but then I thought I'd just let someone ask. So for the hubs, we've invested $4 million. When the Commission on Children and Families was sunset, its budget was carved up into a couple of different places. Some funds came to us, some went to the Youth Development Division. $4 million of those dollars were put into developing these 16 hubs across the state. So a relatively small amount of funding that we've been able to leverage in this direction. The rest of the early learning budget, the core services administered by the division that I run, is about $200 million. Oregon pre-kindergarten program is $128 million a biennium, and then the other programs come in there. Employment-related daycare is higher, and I always forget the exact number, so I'll have to report back to you on that, but it's significantly higher and is predominantly federally funded, not state funded. But you can see the scope.
Yeah, I just think those are important clarifications because we've been very laser focused on the hubs and the outcomes that they have had thus far, and yet we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars over here, and that's important too to our success. So
Yes.
I'll open it up to the rest of the board for questions, comments, compliments.
So I have a few, not questions, but comments and one hope. First of all, I want to really appreciate early learning and the agency as it's, I know, trying to get, in the very beginning, getting feet on the ground as well as trying to provide help and support. I'm just going to speak for my region. It was immensely helpful to have the agency step in. It's extremely difficult to start that collective impact work in communities where all these agencies haven't worked together and don't even yet understand why they might want to spend time in millions of hours of meetings in order to build the right relationships in order to actually have a shared vision and move forward. And I can very specifically thank Heidi and Zeke for helping in our region. I also wanted to appreciate United Way for your willingness to step in and be backbone. One of the challenges in the K-12 organization, as much as we would love to reach out and own a lot of this work, is just not having the bandwidth, but that's not the most important part I think we've learned, is that when you're one of the critical partners, and especially one that's viewed as kind of a giant gorilla, it's really hard to help facilitate the work and get it to feel like we're all equal partners, and that's so essential to the relationship building. I just wanted to kind of ditto what you said about forging collaboration and to just continue to emphasize, as much as we want to be about outcomes and need to be about that for kids, it's so essentially about relationship building first. And if we can't do that part and getting all the adults to focus on kids in that relationship building, we just will continue to spin. And I think we've had a lot of experience with that spinning part initially. I also think that it's a great example of how you can take a teeny bit of money, which I think that is what we did as OEIB in those kindergarten innovation grants, took a little tiny bit of money and provided some seed opportunities. I can just speak for my district within my region, being able to garner one of those and maybe move a little bit faster than the whole hub is working, has first of all gotten, at least us and me, past the frustration point, but it's also given us a chance to work with our culturally specific groups in a very close relationship and move really quickly, and then try to then connect in a different way. So get something up and moving, that's been really, really helpful. And so I don't want OEIB, I don't want us to discount, even though, as I know, we all feel, I think, Hannah's frustration she expresses about there's really not enough yet on the plate. I think that because of the groundwork that's been done and the very targeted and specific, as well as the tight-loose way of doing it, has enabled some movement that was kind of stuck for a while. And I don't think it was just our region. I mean, talking to other superintendents across the state. And then one hope I wanted to share out is just kind of like we're doing around the regional achievement compacts, and I know there's overlap. I hope we take all this learned stuff and share with all the hubs together, because, I mean, I'm for one just waiting for those little T-scopes that look like little ducks or chicks or something. So we really should be sharing all of that stuff and not recreating it. So if literacy kits work in one region, why we aren't just duplicating that. And I know that's the intent, but I think it's exciting and an opportunity to celebrate if we could bring all the hubs together that are, and share the progress that's being made, I guess is what I want to say.
If you don't mind, that's a great point. And because we're in this position where we're co-convening in two different hubs, the number of times I'm saying, you know, what we just did over here that we ought to be thinking about over here, which frankly, between Washington County and Multnomah County is not an easy thing to do because they're really different communities and they like and we like to think of each other as different. But there is that opportunity. I do want to say I also share that hope that as a system we'll be able to really build a learning community. And it's not just about the materials. One of the things that I hope you take from this is that what we have created with these kits is unique in terms of the content, but it's also unique in terms of the process. What our community providers have said is this is the first time that a system like the library has actually engaged us in the solution process. And so I think my hope is that we both can share the tools so we can be efficient, but we can also be intentional about how we're changing processes in each of our different communities around how we do this. And I'm excited for Washington County and when we take these materials and are able to apply them there, both in terms of the process outcomes, but also in terms of the legitimate tools.
I just had one more comment to that, because I had written down sort of the way. So I think the idea about relationship building, but also the intentional processes that have worked, and I know you've repeated in different communities, that's part of the learning that we need to capture, not just for the hubs and not just for the racks, but for all the work that we're trying to do across the state. And I agree that there are places, especially across those two counties, where the counties want to see themselves as unique. But also a lot of those partners overlap. And it gets frustrating having the same conversation when you know there's already an answer that's been highlighted somewhere else. And the last thing I wanted to say about the materials, I agree with you. It's what I was most excited about was the work you did with those communities to make it be very specific to the culture versus a translation. And I think that again is work that we need to learn for the whole piece of work that we're doing with OEIB. The beauty in having something concrete is that you have something concrete to say, we got here, but here's how we got there. If we don't ever have anything concrete, you don't really have that piece to say, this is what kind of we all focused on and centered on.
Any other short comments? Yep.
So I really appreciate hearing what's going on. Thank you. But this is on another note, but I wanted to bring it to your attention. And I talked to you just a little bit earlier around the kindergarten assessment and the work that's being done there. There's a real request out in the field to understand the connection between the assessment and student achievement and how they're able to use that information to help them. So you were saying that you worked with Rob on that. So if you could provide a report about when that information was supposed to be provided to kindergarten teachers and how they're supposed to use that to actually help the students, that would be great. And I will do what I promised, which is pull together a group of kindergarten teachers who can give some feedback and help create a better process that works.
Yes, absolutely. For the board, Hannah and I had a sidebar conversation before the meeting about kindergarten assessment, and she's got some great ideas for how we can better support the implementation of it. So Rob and I will work on that and report back.
Thank you so much. I think as a full board, we just want to commend and appreciate our hub leaders. We know that a significant amount of resources, staff capacity, and relationships, as well as community political will, has really been brought to the table, and we weren't necessarily funded to do all of that, and we appreciate it vastly, so thank you. So we are going to continue to move through our agenda. If you need a break to attend to your personal needs, I would encourage you to do that, and we are going to continue to move through our agenda without an official break. So with that said, I'd like to move us directly into our subcommittee updates. And I'm actually going to invite you, Yvonne, to give us a brief update on best practices in the student transition subcommittee, please.
Okay. So first, I'm just going to say that the way I'm going to continue to give feedback is Hilda put together a great chart for us. We sort of copied Ben's idea about having a tracking sheet. And so rather than talk about all the things that we've been talking about, what I'm going to do is bring where we are already sort of forming some recommendations, and then the work that will be focusing on from those. So in November, we had a conversation about the potential use of the Smarter Balance results as a placement alternative to the placement assessments that are given when kids are applying to colleges. So we adopted that sort of in concept. Right now, technical implementation work group will continue to work through the transcript and timing issues, and will request an update in the spring. In addition to that, the only thing I really want to call out from today's meeting is that we had a lot of great presentations and a lot of good conversations around all the work that is happening in the 11 to 14 years. And the question about Smarter Balance is really part of the bigger conversation about what looks like is coming as a recommendation around multiple ways of looking at placement. And the real focus of the conversation today was around proficiency-based grading and proficiency-based learning. And so all I can say about that is we had a lot of great information, and one of the key recommendations we know we need to focus on is helping all of the groups who are doing this work become aligned and perhaps figure out a framework for how we make sure all of it is getting done sort of together and not duplicating, and that we're addressing the gaps along the way. So more to come on that.
Thank you. I will call on myself to give an update on the Equity and Community Partnership Subcommittee. Our committee, which is staffed by Peter and Shantine, and we have very involved and engaged members of OEIB, including Matt and Julia and Sam Henry. We are laser focused on two work products, one being a new policy regarding parent and community engagement. A draft policy was proposed at the last equity subcommittee. That draft has now been taken to organizations and communities across the state, as well as many stakeholder groups, to really vet. It has significantly changed and improved since that time, and we will review that again at our next meeting. The intent and idea going forward is that we will have a clear values-based policy coming from our highest board, really stating our beliefs around truly engaging and listening to communities, parents, and families. The other piece of work that we are deeply engaged in is really around the overrepresentation of students of color and disability, and we have been spending our last two meetings really doing a deep dive into the data and really ensuring that some of the challenges that we perceived are in fact truly the right challenges, and that we have a full understanding of how overrepresentation is and underrepresentation are impacting our students, and of course when students are rightfully placed in and on IEPs, that of course they are getting the right culturally responsive services. So we're really in more of a explorative phase, but it's pretty startling data, and I think the entire committee had a belief that there were significant disparities, but I don't think that any of us quite realized the breadth of the disparity and the impact statewide. The last thing I will share is that Dr. Golden and I had an opportunity this last week to go and spend 2 hours with the Tribal Council of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz and all of their key education leaders, and to really hear from them about some of the really exemplary work that they are doing prior to birth, leading into 0 to 3, in their Head Start programs and all the way to high school completion. And it was just a fantastic example about how a community can really rally around their very priorities, direct their own resources, and work collectively to serve their local community, but also their communities that exist in Salem, Eugene, and Portland. So that was really inspiring, and I know very moving to both Nancy and I. With that said, I will invite Dick Withmell to give an update on the Outcomes and Investments Committee.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The Oregon Investment Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee, we're charged with, I think we need to keep in mind 4 or 5 things here. Develop a framework for analyzing achievement compact at all levels, examine and understand the state's trajectory for 40-40-20, recommend a tool of methodology of analyzing return on investment, monitor implementation and results of strategic investments, and recommend strategic investments for 2015-17 biennium. Our committee is made up of Hannah Vanderling and Ron Saxon and Pam Curtis and Duncan Wise and myself, of course. We just had a meeting end of last week, or a couple of weeks ago, and the subcommittee received a report on achievement compacts that were submitted this fall. The report included current statewide programs and most of the metrics. The average goals that are being set by the districts, and we discussed that today too about these compacts. The committee agreed to send out information to the districts so that the state and the districts needed to be on the reach for their 40-40-20 goals. And we've asked the staff to include historical data on the trajectory document to clearly show how the goals are tied to the Northern Star of the 40-40-20. Need to thank Peter for really babysitting those statistics and coming forward with them for us. The committee received a return on investment report showing how each Oregon district is performing relative to outcomes measured of 3rd grade reading and high school graduation. The ROI report depicted each district based on per student spending and their outcomes, which comes to the point that Hannah made earlier. And certain notable districts are identified that were performing high and levels with below average funding. And then we saw the ones that were just the opposite. The subcommittee expressed interest in showing the OEIB staff to visit and congratulate the interview staff of those notable districts who are giving a great ROI on the entire system. We'll be analyzing and hearing from the same type of report in the compact for higher education in February meeting.
Great. Any questions or comments for subcommittee chairs? With that, I'm going to move us on to the next agenda item, which is our consent agenda. We initially had 2 items on the consent agenda. One was our minutes from December. As you recall, we've already actually approved those at the beginning of the meeting. So we actually only have 1 item on our consent agenda. That item is to approve an unallocated $46,617 to be distributed to the Oregon Institute of Technology. This is unallocated engineering and technology industry council funds, and it is the role of the OEIB to approve any of those. So with that said, is there anyone?
I move approval.
Second. Perfect.
What was the amount again?
$46,617. Any discussion? So moved. Oh, I'm sorry, Hannah, did you have a comment?
No, I just, was there any other request for the money, or, I mean, I read through the report, but I didn't know if there's any other.
Sure. Are you asking to remove it from the consent
No,
agenda?
I'm asking a question for the motion on the floor, which is if we accept it, and I just want to know if there were any other requests for these funds, or if that's the only one that came forward.
Okay.
It's my understanding that this is the only request that came forward.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any objections? So moved. At this time, we will move into public testimony. We have quite a few folks who have signed up for public testimony. So I will just remind our guests that we have 3 minutes allocated per guest. And I also just take a moment to really clarify the role of the Oregon Education Investment Board. This part of our agenda is very important to us. It's very important to us that we hear from our community folks and folks who are doing work across our region. And we want to clarify that in Oregon, we do have 198 locally controlled school boards, and so it's very important that we just remind and share the context that we are really a policy governing board, and so we deeply appreciate and value your input, but we want to be clear that there are some things that folks will testify to that we as a board do not have the on-the-ground school board control about. And so at any point after the public testifying takes place and we have a suggestion, I think we've asked OEIB staff to share with any of our folks speaking about some of the other places that they can bring concerns and issues forward. Again, I will reiterate how important it is for us to hear this information, and we would hate for any of our community members to walk away thinking that we don't feel like this is very important. It's just sometimes that it's an area that we don't have jurisdiction over. So with that said, I would like to invite Mary Whitmore forward on behalf of Explicit Phonics.
Actually, I changed my mind, so can you just go to the next person?
Thank you for joining us today, Mary. Could I invite Dr. Gacco to join us?
Let's talk.
Wake up.
Why don't we do this? I will
He's
move
coming.
on. Why don't we go ahead and invite Jim Anderson to join us, and we will we'll invite you up next.
I'm Jim Anderson, PTA King School, and back under Governor Tom McCall, we had a Oregon Conference on Poverty, and the things that the poor people asked for were the two top resolutions were one, more jobs, and two was more child care. And so I'd like to think that you folks could have some influence on giving these people more child care. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Gacco?
I do know you're not the reason why you're here. Why you have to wake up in the morning and be here 1 to 4. You've been charged with some functions, with some activity, very critical area. Education. Because our life is around education. If you study it the way I do, you look at what is happening in Paris, the situation there, all those young men running all over the place with the guns in their hand. They're not educated. The Ferguson education problem, most of those kids on the street, they drop out. We were given something graphically this morning. I don't think we didn't have that. You missed that. What is happening to us in our school system. Then comes I don't call them my clients. I go after the least of my brethren. I learned that in my Christian journey. I have 4 boys. They did very well in school. Graduated, every one of them, from the best school in the nation, as a matter of fact. They're now taking care of themselves. But I have to go after the least, those who are not doing well. Those who are not doing well, we've got to go after them to help them so they can contribute something to the society they live in. I keep on talking about it because it won't be long before some of you see me, they know what it's going to talk about. They leave. They don't want to hear it anymore. That's why you don't see many African Americans coming here to testify. It always seems that you don't want to hear them anymore. Because you're going to be saying, oh, I've heard it before. I don't want to hear it again, but we have to do something, don't we? The whole district in Portland public schools, they are not performing. Every one of them. I know about seven schools, but the one that concerns me is the King Elementary School that have been declared worst school in Oregon. We don't talk about it. There is no community outrage about that. A school declared worst school in America, in Oregon. That's where every time you see me, you see somebody who's going to be talking about something some of you don't want to hear. I have to talk about it. Those kids need to participate in our democracy. They need to participate. They need to contribute something. They must graduate, every one of them. That's why I don't talk about 64%. I talk about 100%. 100%. It had to be. Whose children going to be the leftover? Who is that? Not my kids. 100%. So, I keep on, I know you're there. I know you, I mean, you show up. You are at the table. But I want you to think about these kids that are nowhere to be found. But we find them in prison. That's where they are. On the street at night, selling drugs, dope, and messing around. In America, it's unacceptable.
And I apologize, Dr. Gabo, I have to be fair.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
about time. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and I'm sure our whole board hopes that you come to every meeting and continues to remind us. At this time, I'd like to invite Steve Buell from Oregon Save Our Schools.
I have two comments. One is on achievement compacts, which you're talking about going to a three-year system for them. Well, you don't even have a one-year system going now because you're switching to Common Core. Nobody mentioned that. The Common Core SBAC testing, the SBAC testing which you can't correlate to the OAKS testing. So, three-year system based on what? You don't even have any longer a test that's statewide that measures reading level for the third grade. So how are you going to check reading level for the third grade when the test doesn't measure that? What are you going to do? You have you got this achievement compact, which we at Oregon Save Our Schools have been belittling now for 2 or 3 years, and we got in trouble in the school district that I am from for saying, hey, we can't set the standard for third grade reading because we don't have any tests, there's no continuity. And it's like, geez, we just think, well, we'll just go along. That's one thing. Second thing is, once again, the state superintendent of public instruction has left the meeting again and isn't here to hear public testimony. I don't think I've seen him here one time in 3 years, certainly not in the times I've been here. And I think you have to be careful to remember that your job really, to a huge degree, is the school system itself. And there's no necessity to screw up the school system in order to do the other things that you want to do. The hubs, which sounds wonderful, but do you have to screw up the school system, the K-12 school system, in order to do that? And the answer seems to be yes. When the governor slaps down the head, acting as the superintendent of public instruction, slaps down the head of the teacher union who is talking about saying, hey, look, we've got some problems out here in the schools, by using logic, which doesn't make much sense, as we've got problems every place. Well, that's nice, but your job really is to work on those problems to a huge degree, and just saying you've got to be careful that you don't move totally away from the schools themselves, because when you undermine the education of the public schools in the state of Oregon, which you're basically doing, you don't just undermine the children in those schools, but you also undermine all of the children of color in those schools. So it's an incredible inequity to do what you're doing and to continue along the path that you're going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. And I hope at the end of this meeting, I know that you are here on behalf of Oregon Save Our Schools, but I know you serve also in the role of a Portland Public School Board member, and you have a group of parents from King Elementary School that have some very positive suggestions that maybe you all can get together and talk about. Can we have next have Rex Higgins on behalf of...
That says the Canby Education Foundation. That's just the hat I picked to wear today. I've got a lot of them.
Welcome, Rex.
That's one of them, all of them education.
And could you help me properly pronounce your last name?
Higgins.
Is it Higgins?
Yeah, it's not Hagen Market. Okay. I wish it was, but it's not. I'd like to start off by giving kudos to two people today. First to Hannah. I think if you don't pay attention to what Hannah was telling you, you're out of your minds. We are very close to a teacher revolution. Keep your eye on opt-out. The system will be broken down. It is going to be broken down. And if you guys don't get on the right side of that issue, you are totally irrelevant. I would hope you learned a little bit from your near-death experience with the achievement compacts, but we'll see. Secondly, to Megan and early learning. I noticed that early learning is paying a lot of attention to metrics. Those metrics are what holds the workers together that do the work. If I think this is true, if the people doing the work feel the metrics are appropriate, that's going to help. If they feel they're inappropriate, as they do with the standardized testing and SBAC, it's just not going to be put together. In some ways, early learning has benefited from being kind of in the background because they haven't had to jump to all this crazy stuff. So, 3 bits of advice, maybe it's 4. I would just say to you, if you have any ability to influencing dumping the SBAC, do it now. Other states are doing it. It is going to be a disaster. Parents are going to be very unhappy, and the opt-out movement is doing nothing but growing. So you can ignore it if you want to, even if the governor wants to, but it's stupid, at least foolish. Secondly, look really carefully at the kindergarten assessment tool. Very carefully. It is my contention, and I'm working on this, Megan, that there's at least a huge body, if not a consensus, of expert opinion in early childhood education that the focus of that instrument is not appropriate for young kids. Big group of powerful people. Will they ever do anything in the state? I don't know, but you need to look really carefully at that. I don't know what good it possibly is in its current form. Third, a little more philosophical. You need to think and talk, which you've never done seriously, in my opinion, never talked about the relationship between funding and change. Change costs money. Mark can sit here and glibly say, oh, we're not going to have any more resources, we're just going to rearrange the one we have, and at the same time, the first and second, third words out of his mouth always are, grant. We got a grant too. We got a grant too. I'm not knocking that. I'm simply saying, you have never really considered that. You've never talked to people that even know anything about it, as far as I can tell. You really need to think about it. And I guess the ROI report is fascinating to me. I can't wait to see it. And then I will just end by adding to my colleague Steve's comment, not only is the governor gone, but only Mr. Saxton from the business community, as far as I can tell, he remains at this table. Sorry, maybe I should include Julia in that. But there are a number of people that come in here, obviously with the opinion, they demonstrate by their behavior, that they're just here to give orders. As soon as they've given them, they can leave. That attitude is killing you guys out there, and it's part of the populist movement. Good luck.
Thank you so much for being here with us. At this point, I'd like to invite Anita, is it Mention? Is Anita here? No? Okay. This concludes our meeting for today. Thank you, fellow board members, and thank you, audience members.